Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Association of the United States Army's annual conference and trade show in Washington, D.C., the #1 gathering of U.S. Army leaders from around the world. Our coverage here is sponsored by General Motors Defense, Bell, L3Harris, and Leonardo DRS, and it's our honor to be talking to former Deputy Defense Secretary Bill Lynn, who is the president and CEO of Leonardo DRS. Bill, it's always a pleasure seeing you.
Great to see you, Vago.
So let's talk a little bit about what's new in the Leonardo Zoo. Down on the stand, you guys have an armored vehicle. What are some of the things that you guys are highlighting at this AUSA with the focus on multi-domain operations and air defense and so many other priorities that the Army has?
I think one of the priorities we're really highlighting is force protection. We're bringing to the Army now active protection system. We just started production of that beyond 4 brigades of M1 tanks. We have an IM SHORAD, a short-range air defense system that goes on General Dynamics Stryker vehicle, ability to shoot down UAVs and other short-range air defense threats. We have infrared countermeasure systems that protect helicopters. So we have a whole suite of systems that are a new generation of protection for our forces in the field.
Let me take you to the question of Futures Command. We talked a little bit about that last year. There were a lot of questions at the time the command stood up. Still some questions you hear a little bit about whether or not there are disconnects between how the command is approaching things or the acquisition community. Although the overall response tends to be pretty positive. What's been your experience in this new relationship, which is very, very different in terms of the relationship that everybody knew for a very long time with requirements guys in TRADOC and then an acquisition community, whereas this is a very different, much more conjoined process at the end of the day?
So the key connection here, Vago, is the connection between the Futures Command and the leadership. The leadership originated the Futures Command, and the leadership's evolved with Ryan McCarthy succeeding to the post of Secretary of the Army and General McConville becoming chief. They were at the start of this, and they are still clearly using it as a vehicle to implement their priorities, using this night court process to move resources, funding those 6 CFTs, and again using the Futures Command as the vehicle to implement the priorities of the leadership of the Army. And I think that's the key distinction, and that's what's making this a success so far.
And as we were talking a little bit earlier, right, I mean, that process, Mark Esper, former Army Secretary, is now the Defense Secretary, and the former Chief of Staff of the United States Army, Mark Milley, is now the Chairman. So they also were part of that origination story for this. Talk to us a little bit about the speed. Do you notice? You've been in this game for a very long time, both serving in the department, up on the Hill, and in industry. Do you see a speed difference in how quickly things are moving from an acquisition perspective? Because for the entire time I've covered this space, acquisition reform has been a constant.
I mean, we've obviously gone through different evolutions of acquisition reform, but I think there is a commitment to greater speed, greater agility. And I think you're seeing that with the congressional reforms of a couple of years ago. You're seeing it with the department using other transaction authority. You're seeing it with the commitment Ellen Lord and others in the acquisition community have to cutting through the bureaucracy, trying to make decisions faster, trying to accelerate development cycles. It's a long path, but I think they're certainly making progress with the initiatives coming from all different angles.
Let me ask you, take you to the budgetary environment. You were a budget diviner across your career, also having been scarred occasionally by the budget process or delivering scars, depending on which side of the seat you were on. Talk to us a little bit about what your projection is for the outlook on the defense budget. I mean, as a chief executive, you're planning out a couple of years ahead. Leonardo has been extremely successful. I mean, you guys' returns really have been sector leading, especially for your size of business, all of which makes your boss, Profumo, to be a little bit more demanding, I'm sure, in next cycle. He has a reputation for being that way, as many good CEOs are. But talk to us a little bit about where you see defense spending going, whether or not the White House remains, if President Trump gets reelected, or if Democrats end up winning. I know that you have to war game this out a little bit in terms of how things go. How do you see the environment no matter what happens on the political scene?
I think you see two dominant characteristics about the budget scene right now. One is defense spending is at a very, very high level, over $700 billion. Even if you do inflation-adjusted terms, that's at the high end of the Reagan peacetime budgets, which were the highest in at least the peacetime Cold War. The second dynamic I think you see is the growth is slowing. I think we've had about 5% growth over the last 4 or 5 years. I think we see it now slowing to 1 or 2% inflation, or not even quite inflation. But again, it's off a very, quite a high base. Going to the future, I think the election will have only a modest impact. I think there's fairly strong bipartisan support for the levels of defense spending that we have now because it addresses the world environment we have now. So you might see a little bit up or a little bit down, depending on who wins the election, which party wins the election. But I don't think you're going to see a massive increase, and I don't think you're going to see a massive cut. I think we're going to see flattish defense budgets, no big increases, no big reductions over the next several years.
But one of the things which every administration is trying to do is to do major muscle movements. Part of the Night Court process was to free investment to spend on other things, but many of the things the Army tried to get out of, Congress reminded them that they're part of the Board of Directors process on this. And for example, Chinook, Block 2 ended up back in the budget. Do you think that there are going to be these major trade-offs, these major muscle movements that people say are necessary? Do you think that there is a political appetite in order to deliver them? Or at the end of the day, is the department going to stick with what it's got and then add cost on top of it for whatever it wants new?
Well, I mean, you're certainly right. The budget's always a political process. Congress has the power of appropriations, and they're certainly going to exercise it. But I think the department has to propose what it thinks right. It is certainly not going to get everything approved. So you make your proposals, you make your arguments. I think they've had a relatively high success rate, but it's certainly not been 100%. I wouldn't expect it to be 100% going forward, but I think it's important that the department go through the process of prioritizing what its needs are, putting the resources against those needs, and then making the case to Congress.
Lest we forget, right, when the Obama administration started and you were in the administration then, a lot of very, very big programs were canceled. So, I mean, if you want to do it, you can, can't you?
Yeah, no, I think you can make changes. As I said, you do have to make the case to Congress, and they're the ultimate arbiter. But I think if you make the case and if you make the overall arguments and you make them strongly, you will get you won't succeed with every proposal, but I think you'll have a very high success rate.
Let me ask you one last question about cyber. That was one of the things that was a very high priority throughout your tenure. When you're, it's so many. It's interesting how many of the things. Not to say, well, you were right and you were a little bit ahead of your time, but a lot of things that you were talking about in terms of, asking contractors to secure their entire supply chains, the importance of having even better cybersecurity levels. There was a very, very funny story that someday we'll make it into a book where I came into your office with a novel electronic feature, and you said, "Hey, what is that?" And I thought, "Oh, wow, you're very interested in it." And you were like, "Let's put a warning out that nobody can use this little doodad in any of our offices." But I digress. Talk to us a little bit about how the administration is looking at cybersecurity. Full disclosure, Northrop Grumman is sponsoring our cybersecurity conference coverage, as well as our cyber report that comes out on a weekly basis. But talk to us a little bit about the way the administration is looking at this, the policies Ellen Lord wants to put in place in order to secure the cyber industrial infrastructure of the nation from the prime contractor level on down. And what are the challenges it presents, and how you guys are going about securing that supply chain, given that you're only as secure as your weakest link at the end of the day.
Well, I mean, the department's gone down this path of deliver uncompromised, and what they mean by uncompromised is you need to have weapon systems and communication systems and network systems that are not going to be compromised by our adversaries while they're in the field or while they're at home, for that matter. A key part of that, as you said, and a focus of Ellen Lord, and back when I was there, our focus as well, was not only ensuring that the prime contractors are protecting their systems, but that they're responsible for the supply chain. That's frankly very, very challenging, but it's critical. because it doesn't really matter when the compromise enters the system. If we have a system that's compromised, we're not going to feel better about it because it came early in the supply chain rather than late in the process. So I think the kinds of protections that the department's putting in are absolutely what's needed. It's foundational to the effectiveness of our weapon systems to be able to ensure that none of those systems, none of those communications systems, none of those networks will be able to be used against us by our adversaries.
Every company is working to improve its cyber game, both in engineering in the front end, but as well as then appliques, or even retrofitting it on older systems that may not have this degree of security. How are you guys making sure that you remain on that cutting cyber edge? Every company now has recognized that they do have some organic capabilities that may be much better than they may have even originally thought, but each company is also trying to improve either through acquisition, by going outside. How are you guys doing this enterprise-wide across Leonardo, which is a company that does everything from commercial aircraft all the way to military aircraft to the most complex weapon systems? I mean, how are you guys using a corporate integrated approach? And then what's the DRS approach that you're using as well, given that the North American market is a little bit different than elsewhere you operate?
Well, I mean, as you said, not just Leonardo DRS, but the parent Leonardo have enormous cyber capabilities. Leonardo is part of the team that provides cyber protection for NATO, for example. We try and use those capabilities, we try and use our organic capabilities, but I think the key that we're focused on is not to think of cyber as a discrete product, but as a part of every product that we provide. We need cyber assurance in every product we provide because we cannot afford for those products to be compromised given who's using them and the lives that depend on them.
Bill Lynn, President and CEO of Leonardo DRS. Sir, thanks very much. It's always a pleasure. And enjoy the game tonight, right? I mean,
Go Nationals.
Go Nationals. How do you think it's going to go?
Oh, they're going to win.
And then who do you think? So what kind of World Series do you see out there then?
Yankees and Nationals.
And then you're going to be rooting for?
Yankees and Nationals.
Well done, Bill. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.